Good morning, everyone. We're going to be diving into some heavy stuff today, so I'm going to start by asking you to think about something. If you could change just one thing about how your country is dealing with climate change, what would it be? Hold on to that thought because it might come in handy as we unpack some recent news.
That's a great question to kick things off with.
We're going to be talking about, well, it's been all over the news lately, right? The UN's latest warning about this possible 3.1 degrees Celsius global temperature increase. That's this century we're talking about.
Yep.
So we've been combing through a bunch of news articles and research reports, all based on this UN Environment Program report. And our mission today is to, well, cut through all the noise, figure out what it all means for you, for me, for everyone, really.
And what's interesting is this report doesn't just focus on the bad news, the doom and gloom projections.
Right.
It actually points to some pretty encouraging developments, especially when it comes to renewable energy.
So it's not all bad? Okay, that's good to hear. But let's be honest, the report does paint a pretty grim picture overall, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. If we stick with our current policies and pledges, basically, if we just keep doing what we're doing, we're headed for a 3.1 degrees Celsius temperature increase by 2100. And that's a pretty scary thought. But here's the thing. Even if countries manage to fulfill their current climate plans, the ones they've already laid out, we're still looking at a warming of 2.6 to 2.8 degrees Celsius.
So even the best case scenario, we're still way off track.
Exactly.
I remember when the Paris Agreement came out, that 1.5 degree target was a huge deal. It was like this red line we weren't supposed to cross.
Right. It was all about preventing the absolute worst climate disasters. And going past 1.5 degrees Celsius would mean things get a lot worse. We're talking more intense heat waves, more frequent wildfires, and devastating floods becoming the norm.
Yeah, you can't really escape those headlines these days. It seems like every other week, another part of the world is dealing with some kind of climate-related disaster.
And it's only going to get worse, with every little bit of warming we see. It's not just about hotter summers. It's rising sea levels, ecosystems getting completely disrupted, and even food shortages.
It's like this ripple effect that impacts the whole planet.
Exactly. It touches pretty much everything.
So knowing all of this, why are we still struggling? What does the report say about why we're so far off track?
Well, one big problem is that greenhouse gas emissions actually went up in 2023.
Really?
A 1.3% increase. And that's higher than the average increase we've seen over the past decade. The report points to the G20 nations, the world's biggest economies, as the main culprits. They're responsible for a staggering 77% of global emissions.
So the countries with the most resources are also the biggest polluters. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Does this mean we're doomed to a 3-degree warmer world?
Not necessarily, but we need to make some drastic changes, fast. The report calls for a massive increase in renewable energy, like tripling the global capacity by 2030.
Tripling by 2030. That seems pretty ambitious.
It is. But here's the good news. The report highlights that renewable energy is becoming way cheaper. It's actually becoming more competitive with fossil fuels. Take solar energy, for example. Costs have dropped by more than 80% in the last 10 years.
So the solutions are actually within reach.
Exactly. The technology is advancing and the cost is coming down. That's a powerful combination.
So if we have the tech and it's becoming more affordable, what's holding us back? Is it just a lack of political will?
Political will is a big part of it, sure, but there's more to it than that. We also need to think about the economic and social challenges. What about the jobs and industries that depend on fossil fuels? The shift to renewables needs to be handled in a way that's fair for everyone.
It's not as simple as flipping a switch, right?
Right. It has to be a fair and inclusive transition. And this is where those upcoming COP29 talks in Azerbaijan come in. One of the key focuses is going to be on providing more financial support to developing countries so they can also make this transition.
It's about making sure no one gets left behind.
Exactly. Global cooperation and financial support are crucial. The report makes that very clear.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture, the UN's warning, the gap between our goals and our emissions, and this huge need to shift to renewable energy. But let's get a bit more specific. Let's talk about something that might hit closer to home for our listeners. Aviation.
Yeah, good point. The report calls out the aviation sector for having a particularly dramatic increase in emissions, like a 19.5% jump in 2023 compared to 2022.
Wow, 19.5%. That's a lot. Is that just because people are flying more?
It's definitely part of it. As the global economy recovers and travel restrictions ease up, we're seeing a huge surge in air travel. But it also shows how hard it is to decarbonize this sector.
So if we're supposed to be cutting emissions like crazy, does that mean we all have to give up flying? Or are we going to be stuck on trains and buses from now on? What happens to travel?
It's a big question,
Yeah.
and it's one that researchers and innovators are trying to figure out right now.
So they're working on solutions.
Yeah, there's a lot of research going on. Sustainable aviation fuels, electric planes. But all of that is still in the early stages.
Makes you think twice about that next flight, huh? I want to put this question to you, the listener. Does knowing all of this change how you think about traveling? What would make you feel better about hopping on a plane? What kind of innovations in sustainable travel would you like to see? Think about that. We're going to be back in a minute to talk about some potential solutions and reasons to be hopeful.
It's definitely a tough thing to grapple with, the future of travel.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine giving up those quick trips, to see family or just a weekend getaway. Not to mention those big dream vacations we've all been saving up for.
I hear you, but remember how we were talking about those positive developments in renewable energy? There's a lot of hope there. The report actually points out how the cost of renewables is plummeting. Like solar and wind power. They're getting more and more competitive with fossil fuels every single day.
So it's not just about waiting for some magical new tech to come along and save us.
Yeah.
The solutions are already out there.
Exactly. The technology is advancing so rapidly, and the costs are making more and more sense. It's really driving change.
So we've got the tech, the price is right. So what's the holdup? Is it just down to politics? Is it just about getting the right people in power?
Political will is definitely a huge factor, no doubt. But it's not the whole story. There are some real economic and social challenges that we need to address. Think about all the jobs and industries that rely on fossil fuels. We need to manage the transition to renewables in a way that's fair for everyone.
I can't just forget about the people whose livelihoods are tied to those industries.
Right.
It can't just be about embracing the new shiny tech. We have to make sure no one gets left behind.
Right. It has to be a fair process for everyone. And that brings us back to those COP29 talks in Azerbaijan. A key focus there is going to be on getting financial support to developing countries so they can make this transition as well.
It's about making sure every country has the resources they need to make this shift.
Yeah, global solidarity. It's crucial. The report is really clear about that. Developed countries need to take the lead. They need to provide the financial and technological help to those who need it.
Okay, so we've got reasons to be optimistic. Renewable energy is becoming more affordable, and there's this increasing understanding that we need global cooperation. But what about us as individuals? Does the report touch on what we can do to help? It feels like we're constantly bombarded with messages about recycling, saving energy, making eco-friendly choices. Does all that individual stuff really make a difference?
That's a question a lot of people are asking, and honestly, there's a lot of debate about it. The report itself mainly focuses on these big policy changes and systemic shifts. It doesn't really delve into individual actions.
Which is kind of interesting because it seems like those individual actions are what get the most attention.
Sure.
So is it all just about making us feel guilty? Are the small choices we make really even making a dent?
While it might feel like individual actions are tiny compared to this massive global challenge, they can definitely contribute to a wider shift in awareness and behavior. Remember that question we asked you at the beginning of the episode?
The magic wand question.
Yeah, if you're thinking about changes you'd want to see on a national level, that already means you're engaged. You're thinking critically about this whole issue.
So it's less about beating ourselves up for every plastic straw we use or every flight we take, and more about just being conscious of our choices, being part of a bigger movement towards sustainability.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's about aligning your actions with your values. And when more and more people start living sustainably, it sends a message. It shows businesses and politicians that people actually want change.
It's like voting with your dollars.
Yeah.
Showing support for the companies and products that align with your values.
Right. And even small changes can snowball. Like if you start using reusable bags at the grocery store, maybe your friends and family will see that and start doing it too. And then all of a sudden, that small change has multiplied.
So maybe the report doesn't give us a step-by-step guide, but it's pretty clear that our choices and our voices matter.
Absolutely, they do. So now that we've looked at the big picture and zoomed in on those individual choices, let's go back to that question we asked at the beginning.
Okay, hit me with it again. I'm ready to put my policymaker hat on and really think this through.
So if you could design just one policy to help your country hit those climate goals, what would it be?
It's a big question, but it really gets you thinking, doesn't it? It pushes us to look past the headlines and really wrestle with the issue.
Definitely no easy answers here. And what works for one country might not work for another. You have to think about all the different circumstances and resources and even the political climate.
For sure. But it's exciting to see all the innovative ideas that are out there. Some countries are trying out carbon pricing, making it more expensive to pollute. Others are investing heavily in public transportation to get people out of their cars. And some are even giving incentives for things like energy-efficient upgrades for homes and businesses. Oh yeah, and there's that whole movement towards nature-based solutions, like planting trees and restoring wetlands. It's not just about reducing emissions, right? It's also about adapting to the changes that are already happening and making communities more resilient.
It's a two-pronged approach: mitigation and adaptation.
Exactly. And the UNEP report actually talks about that, the need for a strategy that tackles both sides of the coin.
It's all about taking a holistic approach.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this UN climate warning, I think the main takeaway is that, yeah, the situation is serious, but it's not all doom and gloom. We've seen some pretty stark facts, but there are reasons to be hopeful.
I agree. There's a lot going on, both on a global scale and locally. We've got the tech, we've got the knowledge, and we're seeing a growing willingness to actually do something about this.
It's going to take all of us working together, governments, businesses, communities, individuals. We all have a part to play.
The good news is that the conversation is changing. Climate change isn't some fringe issue anymore. It's being talked about everywhere, in boardrooms, in classrooms, even around the dinner table.
And that's where you, the listener, come in. Stay informed, stay engaged, and get involved. You might be surprised by what you can accomplish.
Whether it's pushing for policy changes, supporting sustainable businesses, or even just having conversations with your friends and family about these issues, every action makes a difference.
We've included some links in the show notes for those of you who want to dive a little deeper. You can check out the full UNEO emissions gap report, and we've also got some info about the upcoming COP29 talks. It's worth a look if you're interested.
It's important to remember that the future isn't set in stone. The choices we make today will determine what that future looks like. So let's choose to create a world that's sustainable, resilient, for ourselves and for generations to come.
That's it for our deep dive today. Thanks for listening and for joining us on this journey. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deeper.
Heat waves crash on distant shores. Forests burn, whispers and roars. Glaciers melt into the sea. While we embrace what we can see. Fossil fuels Powers in our hands to change. Step by step we'll interchange. Solar winds and tidal flows, Earth heartbeat, it still glows. Great horizons we can make.